Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our Career Video Library videos here with Nevada State College Career Services. My name is Zach Kaczynski. I am the Coordinator of Employer Relations here in the Career Services Center. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities at the Department of State, and I'm joined by Jason, who is going to talk a little bit about that. So let me go ahead and just jump into it, have him introduce himself, and then we will jump into the questions.
Well, thank you, Zach, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I appreciate the chance to share information on the opportunities at the Department of State. My name is Jason Vorderstrass, and I'm the diplomat in residence, which basically means I'm the recruiter for the Department of State in the region of Southern California, Hawaii, Nevada, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. I am based in Southern California, but happy to talk to students from Nevada as well, and hope to get out to Nevada here sometime in the near, not too distant future.
Awesome. Yeah, it's the weather is a lovely 108 today. So it's a great time to come.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Department of State and the mission of the department?
Sure. So the Department of State is the federal government's foreign affairs agency. So when you think about diplomacy in the United States, we are the lead agency. I mean, there are other agencies involved with the Department of State in foreign affairs, but we're the main agency that has embassies, which are usually located in national capitals around the world. And then we also have consulates, which are typically located in other cities in the same country. So, for example, in Mexico, we have the embassy in Mexico City, but then we have 9 consulates around the country which provide various services. And we have positions both overseas at those embassies and consulates, but we also have positions in the United States. Most of our positions in the US are in the Washington, D.C. area, although we do have positions in other locations, primarily at passport agencies, which process US passports, which is another one of our responsibilities. And then we also do have some small offices that are part of our diplomatic security service, which is our law enforcement agency, which mostly works on things like passport fraud, visa fraud, and investigating potential employees.
Awesome. So how did you come to work with the State Department? And can you talk briefly about the path that you took to get to your current position?
Sure. So when I finished my undergraduate degree in Southern California at Pomona College, I really wanted to stay in the western part of the U.S. and I had done a work-study job in the admissions office, so that was what I was focused on. I was an international relations major, but thought I would work on international admissions issues, which is what I did for about 6 years in the San Francisco area. And at that time, though, I was also fortunate enough to go to a school that offered free graduate tuition if you were an employee. So I went to law school for 4 years at night. And then by the time I graduated, I decided, well, maybe I'll actually try to be an attorney for a while. So I moved on to the U.S. Department of Labor. But fortunately, they were having a hiring at the time and ended up working for the U.S. Department of Labor in Los Angeles. And in that position, I was working on cases around a region, basically in southwest part of the U.S., including Nevada. But I did have some cases involving migrant workers, particularly from the Philippines and China. So I worked some with the Department of State as well. And so after working with Department of State on occasion and having been in that position for, again, about 6 years, I thought, well, maybe I'll try the Foreign Service Officer test. And was fortunate enough to get through that process. So about 17 years ago now, I joined the Department of State as a Foreign Service Officer. And in that time, I've had assignments in Jamaica, in Hong Kong, and in Mexico, as well as several assignments in the Washington, D.C. area. Most of those assignments have focused on human rights, labor rights, trafficking in persons, and United Nations issues.
Wow, that's amazing. And as usual, usually what I hear from employers is that their path is not a straight line.
Right.
And that's always how it turns out. And so that's great to hear. So what sorts of internships or scholarships are available for students at the Department of State?
Sure. So we have several internship programs, 4 main ones. We have the Pathways program, and if you're looking at all at federal employment or federal internships, that's across the whole federal government. Pathways internships are paid internships, and there are two different types. There's those that take place during the school year, and you go to school part-time, and then you work basically 30 or 40 hours a week. And then there are other Pathways internships that you do during breaks. So like during the summer break, or if you take a break, between like the fall and spring semesters or something like that, or if you take a semester off. What's great about the Pathways internships is that the Department of State, they are all paid, and then they will accrue, the hours that you spend in those will accrue towards getting a job. So basically, if you can get a Pathways internship, either as an undergraduate or a graduate, because they're available to both undergraduate and graduate students, as long as you do the number of hours that are required, you can move right into that civil service position. Now, the civil service positions for us are all in the US. And one thing that I should say about the Pathways internships is that many of these are outside of the US, because not outside the US, excuse me, outside of Washington, D.C., because many of these are at our passport agencies, which are all around the country. So they're all inside the US, just to clarify there, but in places other than DC. We do have them in DC as well. Some of these you can maybe do parts of them remotely, but generally speaking, you probably need to be able to go into the office. It just depends on the position. But there are, of course, Pathways positions around the federal government. And one thing I would say about civil service employment is that once you have a civil service position somewhere in the federal government, it's much easier to change agencies than it is to come in from the outside. So I'm obviously here to recruit for the Department of State, and I'd love to see more people apply for the Department of State. But if for some reason, it doesn't work for you to join the Department of State right away, that doesn't mean that you never could in the future. And in fact, it's quite common to see people switch agencies, especially in the civil service. Because a lot of positions in the civil service, once you're employed, will give a priority to people already in the civil service. So that's Pathways. Our other paid internship program is the U.S. Foreign Service Internship Program. This is a program only for undergraduates, and it's only available for those who will be or will about to be sophomores or juniors at the end of August. The deadline is only once a year, and the deadline is usually at the end of August. This particular program is a needs-based program, so it is quite competitive, but we are based, need is an important factor. And in this particular program, you have a paid internship overseas and a paid internship in Washington, D.C. So it's a great way to have exposure to the Department of State, both inside the U.S. and outside the U.S. Part of the reason why the deadline is so far in advance is that we do need to do the background check. We do a security clearance. You get a security clearance through this program, which could potentially help you for other jobs in the future. And that does take generally about 6 months. So that's why the deadline is in August, even though you won't start until probably May or June of the next year. Our other two internship programs are the Virtual Student Federal Service. This is a long-running virtual program that we've had even before the pandemic. And in this program, you work up to 10 hours a week on a project that you can do on your own computer. Basically, as I said, it is unpaid, but the nice thing about it is it does have a much faster selection process. You apply in July, and then you would start in September. It goes through the academic year, and this is for either undergraduate or graduate students. And those could be projects like, I have several virtual student federal service interns myself, working on things like my presentations or helping me, with connections at various organizations around my region, or they could be for embassies that are overseas. You can do these, of course, because they're virtual from anywhere in the world. So it's a great way to get exposure to the Department of State, but, where you don't have to spend quite as much time. And it's, as I said, a faster selection process. And then the final internship program that we have is what we call the Student Internship Program. This is, again, for both graduate and undergraduate students. It is unpaid, but I would mention that overseas, outside of Western Europe, many embassies and consulates are able to provide housing. I previously served in Tijuana in Mexico, and we never had enough applicants for this, at least when I was there, and we were always able to provide housing. Now, that's not guaranteed, but it is a way to help minimize your costs if you go for this program. There are also some scholarship programs for Washington, D.C., Paris, and London if you're going to one of those locations. I would also mention that occasionally there are internships like this in other parts of the US besides Washington, D.C. So there have been in Southern California, in Tucson, Arizona, San Francisco. I don't remember seeing any in Las Vegas in recent years, but it could be, in the future. We have one very small office in Las Vegas. It's our diplomatic security has a small office there. So that would be the only possibility locally, but there are sometimes ones closer. And on the subject of scholarships, we also do have scholarships that can help you out with the internships or for just going overseas. For example, we have the Gilman Scholarship, which is for federal Pell Grant recipients, and that will pay for you to go overseas for an internship or study abroad in a summer. We also do have the Critical Language Scholarship, which is a program that will help you learn one of 15 languages or help improve your skills in one of 15 languages. And we basically pay for you to go overseas. There's an orientation you do in Washington, D.C., and then you go overseas. In the 15 languages, some of them you do have to have previous exposure to, but many of them you do not. So that's an overview then of our internship and scholarship programs.
Thank you for all that information.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the fellowship opportunities that are available?
Sure. So the fellowships that we have are in two types. So for the foreign service, which are our positions where you're working outside the US, for the foreign service, our fellowships are basically ones that will help you get into the foreign service and pay for your schooling along the way. So we have three of those. We have the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship, which, as the name suggests, is for study in IT. And that's our only fellowship that will help pay for your undergraduate study. So you can use it for 2 years of study. So you can use it for your junior and senior year of an IT-related degree, or for a graduate degree in an IT-related field. It could be cybersecurity, it could be computer science, management information systems, something like that. After you do those 2 years, we pay up to $37,500 a year for those 2 years. And then the trade-off is that you have a commitment to work for us for 5 years as an information management specialist, which is a career where you're in charge of the IT infrastructure at our embassies and consulates around the world. And in the foreign service, you're generally moving every 2 to 3 to 4 years, and probably would spend about half of your career outside the US and then the other half, or maybe a little less, inside the US at various locations, primarily in Washington, D.C. So the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship also is available for people who've already graduated if you're thinking about an IT-related graduate degree, and it doesn't matter if you didn't study IT as an undergrad. We also do have 2 graduate fellowships, the Wrangell and Pickering Fellowships. These are very similar fellowships in the sense that they both pay for a graduate school up to $42,000 a year for tuition fees and living expenses. And then they lead to a career as a foreign service officer, the same sort of career that I have. So the deadline for the Wrangell and Pickering Fellowships is usually in October. The deadline for the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship is usually in February. Now, there are also 2 civil service fellowships. These are a little different in the sense that they do not pay for your schooling. What they do is they help you get into the civil service. So the 2 civil service fellowships are the Presidential Management Fellowship, which is across the federal government. Almost all agencies participate in that program. And it leads to a 2-year paid program that's basically designed to expose you to different parts of the civil service, either a couple of different offices within one agency or maybe even more than one agency. And then after those 2 years, you move into a full-time civil service position somewhere in the US. The other program, which is quite similar, is the Veterans Innovation Partnership Fellowship. The main difference is that that program is 1 year and, as the name suggests, is limited to veterans. There is a veterans preference for the Presidential Management Fellowship as well. Typically, the deadlines for these 2 programs are in October.
Got it. Thank you. So finally, last but not least, what sorts of career opportunities are available?
So on the career side, there's quite a few different opportunities. We have the foreign service, as I mentioned, and then we have the civil service. So on the foreign service side, I'll mention those first. The foreign service, we're split into a couple different categories. We have the foreign service officer career, which is the one that I am in. That there's no particular academic or work experience requirement. You can come in as long as you're age 21 and a US citizen. There's a test that's offered 3 times a year in February, June, and October. And once you pass that test, there's a couple of other steps to the process. So it does take about a year to 18 months. It's not something that you can start right away. In the Foreign Service officer career, you do have to select one of 5 career tracks. As a Foreign Service officer, you're supposed to be a generalist, which means that you can do any of those jobs. And I myself in my career have done, I think, about 4 of the 5 different career tracks. But the idea is that one of them will be your focus through your career. So those are consular, where you're doing visa work or helping American citizens abroad. Economic, where you're writing economic reports and analyses. Management, where you're basically making sure that the embassy or consulate meets occupational safety and health standards. There's political, which is what I am, where you're doing political analysis and reporting. And then there's public diplomacy, where you're basically in charge of the embassy website, dealing with the press and organizing our cultural exchange programs. In addition to the Foreign Service officer career, we also have 19 Foreign Service specialist careers. Those are ones that do require a certain type of academic or work experience background. So we have several related to business administration, including human resources officer, an office management specialist, which is basically an administrative assistant position, and also a financial management officer, which is basically an accounting position. Then we have some related to IT. I mentioned the information management specialist before. We have some engineering positions. We have a law enforcement position. There's quite a few different ones. For many of these, they're not open all the time. They'll usually open at least once a year, but not always. Although for the information management specialist and the office management specialist, which is our administrative assistant position, those 2 are open all the time. We have a test that's available throughout the year, and then you move on to the next steps if you pass the test. For the others, there's not a test. You just submit your resume, and then there's a review to make sure you meet the minimum qualifications, and then you move on to the next steps. For all of these, it still is about an 12 to 18 month process. Our final opportunity in the Foreign Service is the Consular Fellows Program. This is a program where you do visa interviews and American citizen services overseas, but for a maximum of 5 years. So it's not a career opportunity, but it's a way to get exposure to what the Department of State is all about, and to see if you enjoy, living overseas and some of the other challenges that come with a Foreign Service career. This is our only program where you must speak a language. So this is only open to speakers of Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, or Portuguese. So if you speak one of those 4 languages, you're eligible to apply, but you will be tested in that language as part of the process. And there is a test that you take as the first step that's available again throughout the year. So that's the Foreign Service. On the Civil Service side, those positions, as I said, are mostly in Washington, D.C., although there are some in other places. And those, you'll see the opportunities on usajobs.gov, just like any other federal civil service position. They will also be advertised on our own website, which is careers.state.gov, so you can look for them there as well. But if you're going to be applying for civil service positions, I would recommend that you build your resume on USA Jobs in advance, so that you have it ready to go. And there are also some seminars conducted by my colleagues at the Office of Personnel Management about constructing a federal resume, because it is different than the private sector in the sense that, generally speaking, it will be much longer. Because when you apply for a civil service position, you need to make sure that you include all of the information that's required by the vacancy announcement, even if that means it's more than 1 or 2 pages. So sometimes it'll be a 5 to 7 page resume, and that's fairly normal in the federal government. But they give more tips than just that one. So if you're thinking about federal employment, I would certainly encourage you to look at that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all that information. So for all of these opportunities that you mentioned, what do you look for in qualified candidates for any of these positions?
Right. So for the civil service, that will really be based on the individual job announcement, right? So there will be positions that will be advertised that will say you have to have an engineering background, or you have to have, a certain type of credential, or maybe even a certain language skill in the civil service. There is a veteran's preference too. So if you are a veteran, that will help for any of our programs, both civil service and foreign service. On the foreign service side, having languages, having some overseas experience, or working with a company that maybe has an overseas presence, those are all going to be helpful. Things like Peace Corps or Fulbright, where they've gotten you overseas, those will also, be looked at favorably. But for the foreign service, specialist, you really do have to look at the requirements carefully. So, for example, for the human resources officer, you have to have 3 years of experience within the last 5 years. So don't apply if you don't have it, because you'll just be rejected. I mean, they look at they follow those requirements very strictly. So there's really no flexibility on those. So that'd be my other tip, is when you're applying for federal, we welcome you to apply for as many things as you qualify for. But for foreign service specialists, make sure you do qualify, because if you don't, you won't be able to apply again for a year. For anything any of the foreign service positions, if you don't succeed, you do have to wait a year to apply again for that exact same position. You can apply for something else. Like if you apply for foreign service officer and you don't make it, you could apply for one of the foreign service specialist position, or several foreign service specialist positions in the meantime. But otherwise, you have to wait.
Okay, gotcha. And what about for the internships? What do you usually look for in people wanting to be interns?
Right. I mean, for those, again, studying things that are related to international relations or having some language skills will be particularly important if you're applying to do an internship overseas. But just some kind of, ability to explain why you're interested in, even if you've never studied something international before, but you have an interest in diplomacy for whatever reason, you want to make that clear in your application. The other thing I would say is that certain locations will not have nearly as many applications as others. So, when I was in Tijuana, as I mentioned, we never had enough, right? So that's not necessarily always going to be the case, but you may want to think about that in the sense that, if your dream is to go to Paris, that's great. But just be advised, there'll be a lot of people applying there, and you'll really have to stand out. You'll probably have to have excellent French. You'll have to have a really strong reason why you want to work there. Whereas maybe some other locations, even in Tijuana, I would take people who didn't speak Spanish. I mean, I certainly preferred it if they did, but I was, I needed people enough that I would take them even if they didn't. So some places like that maybe there won't be as many applicants for. You may be, I've heard also my colleague up at the Office of Foreign Missions in Los Angeles has often not got enough applicants. So, that's another thing to, think about is that, apply for what you want, but if you're flexible, that may be, that may be able to help you even if you don't have the strongest connection to whatever the particular issue is that you want to work on.
Great, good to know. I think we did talk a little bit about deadlines and where to apply. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to our little bonus question, which is, what is a piece of career or life advice that you wish someone had given you when you were a student?
I mean, I mentioned that I did work study before I got my first job in an admissions office. And I didn't really do it because I thought I was going to get move into a career, but that's the way it happened. I mean, I was only in it for about 5 years, 6 years before I moved on to become an attorney at the Department of Labor. But, I really urge people to think about things like I mentioned, the Pathways internship that can lead to a job, or other internships that can make those connections. And I know, people have a lot of things going on in their lives that may not always be able to do it. But if you're able to do something like that, I think that will really help pave the way for whatever your career is, even if it's not your, even if it's maybe not like your number one goal right away. But I think, as I said earlier, with like the department, with the Pathways program, once you get into the civil service somewhere, it'll be much easier, I think, to transfer to another part of the civil service. So I guess, as I said, it worked out for me sort of serendipitously. But if I was to give advice, I would say definitely try to find, some kind of experience while you're in school that will help you get a job afterwards. Because, if I'd been applying for admissions officer jobs and I hadn't had that work study experience, I don't think they would have taken me very seriously. But since I could point to, well, see, I did it last year. Yeah, it was a work study job. But for the last year, I was working, I think it was 20 hours a week or whatever it was in an admissions office, so obviously I knew something about it, right? So that's the main piece of advice I like to give people.
Definitely. That's something we preach a lot in our own office of, make sure you don't just go to class, do something extra. And then the other thing I was going to touch on is that in a lot of these videos, a sort of theme that's popped up is sort of be open to experiences, be open to opportunities that maybe aren't your number one thing, but you never know what you're going to end up liking and falling into, and it ends up being a career. You didn't even expect that. So finally, my last question is just, if students have additional questions, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. So I'm very happy to hear from students. That's why I'm here, in the region. Hopefully, eventually, as I said, I'll be able to be, around in person. But in the meantime, I am happy to hear from people by email. My email is dir.southerncalifornia@state.gov. So please feel free to email me there. I am also pretty active on Facebook. I am at facebook.com/dir SoCal. You'll see a lot of interviews there that I've done over Facebook Live in particular. If you can message me through Facebook as well. I do not use LinkedIn. I get a lot of questions about LinkedIn. But between Facebook and my email, hopefully you can reach me. And then I do have office hours, which if you reach out to me by email and it turns out that, you have a more complicated question, I'm happy to share with you the link so you can set up a time to set up a time to chat with you individually as well. But email questions I'm happy to take at any time.
Awesome. And again, everybody listening, they want to hear from you. So please do not be afraid to reach out. That's why they got into this business. They want to talk to students. So please don't be afraid to reach out. So anyway, thank you so much, Jason, for your time. Students, if you're watching and if you want assistance applying to any of these positions, need help working on your resume, we do have some handouts on federal resumes also. Please don't hesitate to make an appointment with our office, which you can do at calendly.com/NSC Career. You can find that link on our website, which is nsc.edu/career. So again, thank you so much, Jason, for your time. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Zach. I really appreciate the chance to chat with you today and share information about our careers.
Absolutely. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.